Hello everyone, welcome to Only Chess. In today's episode, we will be covering how to move the chess pieces. So if you have not seen my first video for the beginners tutorial, I have placed the link in my description. Please check the video. So today we'll start with the movement of the rook. So rook is a piece which moves through the files and rank. That is, the rook here, which is located on the e4 square, can move through the e file and the 4th rank freely if it does not have any obstructions, but it cannot move through the diagonals. Now let's see how rook captures its opponent pieces. Suppose bishop is located on e7. In this position, the rook can capture the bishop on e7. But at the same time, the rook cannot capture the bishop on e7 if his own piece blocks his pathway. In this case, the rook cannot jump over his pawn on e6 and capture the e7 bishop. That's all the functions of a rook. Now let's see the movement of a bishop. A bishop is a piece which moves through the diagonals and it cannot move through the files and ranks. And if it is a dark squared bishop, it can only move through the dark squares and throughout the game. And if it is a light squared bishop, it can move only through the light squares. Here a bishop is located on the d4 square, which is a dark squared bishop, and a bishop on f3 square, which is a light squared bishop. Now the bishop on d4 can move through the a1 h8 diagonal and the g1 a7 diagonal and the freely, and the f3 bishop can move through the h1 a8 diagonal and the d1 h5 diagonal. Now let's see how a bishop captures its opponent pieces. Suppose there's a pawn on b6 and a pawn on h5. Here the bishop can capture the pawn on b6 and also the pawn on h5 in its next move. But suppose a pawn on b7 and a knight is located on d5. In this case, the f3 bishop cannot capture the pawn on b7 because its path is obstructed by the knight on d5. As the bishop cannot jump over the knight, it cannot capture the b7 pawn. That's all what you have to know in case of a bishop. Now let's talk about the knight. The movement of a knight is a bit confusing. Initially, it actually moves through an L shape. The possibilities of a knight moving to different squares is highlighted on the board right now when it is located on the d4 square. So it can move to e6, c6, b5, b3, c2, e2, f3, f5. And that's what you have to know in case of a knight, and through practice the movement of a knight would be more easier. Now suppose a black piece is located on the f3 square. Here the knight can capture the black rook on f3, and even if its own pieces obstruct its path, still in this case the knight can jump over these pieces and take the rook. Knight is a piece which can actually jump over its own piece to capture the opponent's piece. Now let's talk about the movement of queen. The queen is now located on the e4 square, and the queen is a piece which can move through the diagonals as well as through the files and ranks. So it can move through the e file, the 4th rank, and also the h1 a8 diagonal and the b1 h7 diagonal. Similarly, as the rook and bishop, the queen cannot jump over its own piece and capture the opponent's piece. Only if its path is free, it can move and capture the opponent's piece. Now let's see the movement of the king. The king is a piece which can only move one square towards any direction. That is, it can move to any direction but only one square. The movement and the possibilities of the king moving to different squares is highlighted on the board now. Now let's see the movement of the pawns. Basically, there are 8 pawns for both black and white, and the first move of each and every pawn, it can move 2 squares forward. One feature of the pawns which you have to remember is that once a pawn move is made, it cannot be taken back. That is, if a piece moves to a particular square, then it can actually come back to the same square from where it started. But in case of a pawn, if the move is made, it cannot be taken back to the same square. And initially, that is the first move of each and every pawn, it can move 2 squares forward. That is, suppose the e pawn, it is the starting of the game and I want to move the e pawn first. So this e pawn can move 2 squares forward. If the player wishes, he can play 2 squares forward. The pawn can be pushed 2 squares forward. But if the pawn is only pushed 1 square forward, and in the next move of white, if the player wants to push it 2 squares, that is to e5, it is illegal, it is not possible. And once a pawn is pushed 2 squares forward, again in the next move it cannot be pushed 2 squares forward, it can be pushed only 1 square. Similarly, for the black pawns, the same rule applies. Now let's see how a pawn captures. Suppose white played the first move e4, black played the first move d5. In this case, the white e pawn can capture the black d5 pawn in this manner. That is, it crosses and cuts the black pawn. Suppose black played the move f5. In this case also, the e pawn can capture the f5 pawn. Now white doesn't want to capture that pawn. Maybe he wants to support the e4 pawn. In this case, black can capture the e pawn and then white can capture the black pawn. Now
Now that's all what you have to know in case of moving the pawns, and there are 2 movements which I have not discussed in this video, that is the castle and en passant. So those 2 I'll be discussing in my next video, and also in my next video I'll be telling you what are the various phases in a chess game and how to begin a chess game, and later on I will introduce some tricks and traps to win faster. And if this video was useful for you guys, feel free to like, comment the video, and if you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please subscribe and hit the bell icon besides it so that you'll be notified for my next videos. Thank you.